Notes are in the bulletin for you to follow and track along, and there's some questions, and I have started posting those to our messenger group on Facebook if you're on there as well. As you turn there, we will finish out Genesis 31. This morning, I have been excited to get to this point because, as we've seen the last few weeks, Jacob, remember, took his family, and they secretly tried to flee. But last week, what happened? Laban, he caught up, and he wasn't too happy, and he was angry, and he kind of let Jacob have it, but then we saw Jacob turn around and let Laban have it and said, I was a hard worker. I did all these things for you. Why are you doing this to us? And Laban, he's still not happy about it. And this week, we're going to see how Laban responds to Jacob. And I've been looking at this week. I've been pondering. I've been looking forward to this because we get to see an ideal situation of how conflict resolution is so necessary to the Christian life. And it's amazing, many times in the scriptures, we get to see perfect examples of how these things play out in our lives right before us. And we're going to get to see that this morning. So let's dive in. We're going to look at verses 43 through 44 first. Conflict resolution is important. It is important. All right, verse 43. Then Laban answered and said to Jacob, the daughters are my daughters, the children are my children, the flocks, they're my flocks, and all that you see is mine. But what can I do this day for these my daughters or for their children whom they have borne? Come now, let us make a covenant, you and I, and let it be a witness between you and me. Now, we have seen a full-on conflict situation. As we read into the text, there was clearly emotions being displayed. There was anger being displayed. And besides the grace of God and him telling Laban, don't hurt Jacob, I think we would have even said major conflict in that sense. But now we come and we find that Laban has said, you did all these things. I don't still understand them. You've made this rebuttal, but I still don't accept it. So let's make a covenant together. Let's make a treaty together. As you look into that verse and this particular passage, it's more of a mutual agreement, a bond, a contract, if you will, that should not have been broken during that time. Now, if you broke this particular treaty, there would have been serious consequences that Laban and Jacob would have been perfectly aware of. And we find here a perfect solution on how to resolve this conflict. And I pose the question to us this morning. Why should we care? Why should we care about this really old covenant in the Old Testament? Why does it matter? Why should it be a big deal to us today? As we read this, it'd be easy to just skip over it and say, well, that was good then. Why should I care now? And I think a good reason we should not skip over a passage like this is because conflict is something we deal with every day. It's something that we deal with on a daily basis, and we get to see a particular way how to handle it in the scriptures today. It was like not too long ago, and parents, grandparents, you've been there. You're at the drive-through line. You're ordering the Happy Meals. One kid wants this thing. The other kid wants this thing. Usually, if it was up to Dad, they would all just get the same thing. But, we're gracious. And then you start passing them out. Well, it's not supposed to have cheese, but it has cheese. It's not supposed to have pickles, but it has pickles. It's not supposed to have this, all this. And you start to see this major conflict happening in the back rows. And Dad wants to say, I told you so. But, however, there's conflicts that arise no matter what age. We all deal with them all throughout our lives, and we find that even here. And resolving those conflicts is much more important than the conflict itself. And we're going to see that here. We see that there's been issues. There's been angry words shared between Jacob and Laban. But I think we get a glimpse here and we see the value of why resolving those conflicts is so important, and especially to our lives today. Now, so we're on the same page. Here's a working definition. Conflict is when both parties sin against one another, either in their communication or in their actions, and are then in opposition to one another. Now, we know, just by that definition, we're going to have conflicts weekly, if not daily. So what does God think about those conflicts? Well, if it was up to him, he would desire us not to have them. Olivia, throw up Ephesians 4, 1 through 3. It says, I, therefore, a prisoner for the Lord, urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you have been called, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love, eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. Pursuing peace should always be on our minds. Now, is it always possible, truthfully? No. We live in a sin-cursed world, but peace should always be on our mind on how to handle these conflicts and come to a resolution. Now, Laban and Jacob are taking the first steps to resolve this conflict. So let's see how they go about this. Look at verses 45 through 50. Conflict resolution is a process. It is a process. Look at verse 45. It says, so Jacob, he took a stone and set it up as a pillar. Pay very close attention before I read any more to what Jacob does and what Laban does. So Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar, and Jacob said to his kinsmen, gather stones. And they took stones and made a heap, and they ate there by the heap. Laban called it Jagar Sadah. I tried this, Sahadutha, but Jacob called it Galeed. Laban said, this heap is a witness between you and me today. Therefore he named it Galeed and Mizpah, for he said, the Lord watch between you and me when we are out of one another's sight. If you oppress my daughters, or if you take wives besides my daughters, although no one is with us, see, God is witness between you and me. All right. So we've come. Jacob and Laban, they've established the terms for their resolution, if you will. Now, notice Jacob uses one stone to represent something. I'll get to that in a moment. But then he has his kinsmen gather a heap of stones to represent something else. Now, why did Jacob want multiple witnesses to this covenant? Well, there's many possible reasons. It could have been to emphasize the seriousness of this oath between those two parties. It could have been some way to reflect the multiple deities. Notice Jacob took one stone. He worships one God. Notice Laban, he worships several multiple God, deity things. Notice the contrast there between the two, and we'll come back to that. But there's more into these places and these words that we must understand to get the full importance of what's happening here. Now, I'll call it Jagar and Galeed and Mizpah. Now, Jagar and Galeed refer to the heap of witnesses. Mizpah refers to a watchtower. Now, this is important that they use these terms. And let me go into more detail as to why. Now, Mizpah would actually become very important to Israel in the future. It would become the dividing line between Judah and Israel. It would become a very important city. But even more important is this concept that God is a watchtower over all that happens in our lives. God is watching over us. Nothing is hidden from the Lord. I like to think of it as, I was telling Kathy earlier, I think that, Zachary, he started crawling backwards. He's starting to roll over, and he's starting to do that little thing they all did where, they'll start to go for something, and they'll look back to see if anybody's looking or if Dad's looking, and he'll just look back over his shoulder. He'll do this whole number, and he'll look to see, and then all of a sudden he'll grab that cord and try to shove it in his mouth and chew on it and all those things. And even then, he didn't realize Dad was watching. He just couldn't see Dad, or Mom was watching, and he couldn't see Mom, but we were watching the whole time. And I think about that as I think about this passage, because we can go through our lives and just forget that God is watching. God is there. He's omnipresent. God knows what is happening in the day-to-day actions that we are taking. And in a much bigger sense, nothing escapes God's ever-watching eye. Luke 8:17. For nothing is hidden that will not be made manifest, nor is anything secret that will not be made known to come to light. So let's apply this to our lives. Olivia, throw up that quote from Matthew Henry. He said this when thinking about this passage. He said, "When we are out of one another's sight, let this be a restraint upon us, that wherever we are under God's eye." You see, when we walk with that knowledge, when we live our lives knowing God is there. Now, it's not like God is some bully. It's not like I'm looking over Zachary's shoulder as some buller wanting something bad for him, but I want what's best for him. I don't want him to get into anything that might hurt him, like chewing on an electric wire or something like that, right? Or Olivia, when she was little, she stuck her hand right in the VCR when we still had those. Not that she knows what that is anymore, but God's not the big bad bully wanting to punish us for doing wrong, but no, He is realizing what's going on in our lives. He is our protector. We read that in Psalm earlier. He's the God who wants what's best for us. Now, sometimes God allows us to go down those rough roads that we often impose on ourselves because He's going to sanctify us through that process and bring us back and closer to Him, but that's not always the case. Sometimes God is just watching and He'll protect us from something because He knows that's what's best for us. Now, how does that impact our lives? Well, I think it puts up safeguards. When I potentially slander someone or potentially gossip about someone, who knows that? My God knows those things, and that those things, those sins, came out of my mouth. Or maybe I told a little white lie. Well, guess what? We've read time and time again, God does not think highly of those who lie. God knows that we are doing these things. Even if others may not have a clue, God continues to know, and we'll deal with how to deal with those things here in just a moment. Now, as we think about those truths and as we apply them to resolving conflicts, I believe that first, if we want to resolve conflicts, we must seek the good of others over our own good. Now, I know this is radical thinking. We are taught from a very young age to look out for number one, right? We are taught that from day one to think out for ourselves. But 1 Corinthians 10:24 says, "Let no one seek his own good, but the good of his neighbor." Second, if we want to resolve conflicts, we must communicate properly. Now that Proverbs 15:1 verse that's up here, "A soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger," is quite piercing to the heart. That is a hard one to read and know the truth that comes from that. You see, the way we communicate and try to resolve conflicts will ultimately determine if those things get resolved or not. Again, I know it is counterintuitive to what we are taught on how to handle these things, but it works. Why? Because I believe, and I was reminded this week, because the Bible is true. I believe what it says is true. I believe it stood the test of time. It stood the ultimate test that people have tried to destroy it and all those things, and we still hold it in our hands today. And if God says these things work, if He says these things are true, then this is what I need to apply to my life, because I want to be a truth liver, if you will. I want to live as though the truth is coming out of me. And as a Christian, that is what we are called to do. Last, look at verses 51 through 55. Conflict resolution is action-oriented. Action-oriented. And you'll see what I mean. Then Laban, he said to Jacob, "See this heap and the pillar which I have set between you and me. This heap, it's a witness, and the pillar is a witness, that I will not pass over this heap to you, and you will not pass over this heap and this pillar to me, to do harm. The God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judge between us." So Jacob swore by the fear of his father Isaac, and Jacob offered a sacrifice in the hill country and called his kinsmen to eat bread. They ate bread and spent the night in the hill country. Early in the morning, Laban rose and kissed his grandchildren and his daughters and blessed them. Then Laban departed and returned home. All right. Jacob laid his piece of the agreement, and now Laban is adding his little piece of the agreement, and they come to mutual terms for this resolution. Notice, though, that they didn't just say these things, but these things involved action as we look through this text. Laban, now, he invokes the other gods. This was a common cultural practice. He says the God of Abraham. This was a reference to Jacob's father Isaac and his father. The God of Nahor was a reference to Laban's brother and his father Terah. Yet notice, Jacob only acknowledges the God of his father Isaac. Remember that fear of Isaac, the awesome one of Isaac, the awesome God that he now serves. He doesn't give any respect to these other little gods, if you will. Notice this, the resolution to their conflict involved action, not just words. Notice Jacob then offers a sacrifice, which his father would have taught him from a young age. He offers a sacrifice, they share a meal together, and now this covenant is designed to establish security between Jacob's people and Laban's people. And now, these types of agreements would have been taught to their children and would have gone for several generations. These were not just some loosey-goosey, if you will, agreement between two guys that didn't get along. This was an established treaty between two people, and for this to happen, Laban now would have to acknowledge the fact and see Jacob as an equal, or he would not have done this. This was a common cultural practice during those times. And notice, too, Laban, he kisses his daughters, he kisses his grandchildren, and we no longer see any interaction between these groups of people in the Scriptures. As far as we know, these people never had any more communication or involvement with one another. So what do we take from this? Well, I think there are a few things. As I began to read this, several things started to come to mind. We as parents, you try to teach your kids not to just not do something, but you try to teach them what to do instead. This happens to be a daily process in our house normally. to help them see the value of how to resolve things. Even, I could say this morning, but yesterday, I'll go with that one. Things are not always rosy in our house on Sunday mornings either. I will just say that. There's conflicts, she might be little, but that little redhead, can carry her own. And working through and teaching her and teaching the others how to resolve and communicate all these things, it's a process, but we also tell them it takes actions. You can't just say, stop. What do you want them to do instead? There has to be action to what we do to resolve these different conflicts in our lives. Now, as we have seen with Jacob and Laban, I believe it's so important to remember that watchful eye as we try to process through and try to make gains in resolving these conflicts. Here are two thoughts. Olivia's going to throw them up there. First, we are to live aware of the Lord's ever-present eye upon us. This means we must live proactively, living so that we know that the Lord is aware of what's going on. And that also means we wake up in the morning and we should be ever aware that, God, I'm committing my day to living for you. It requires actions to want to resolve these types of things. 1 Corinthians 10:31, so whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do all to the glory of God. It's not some things, it's all things to the glory of God. I like to say, let's brush our teeth to the glory of God in the morning. Let's do all things to the glory of God. Second, we are to live with a proper respect for God's holiness and strive to please Him in all things. Yes, God is loving. God is a loving God who loves us, who cares for us, but He is also a holy and just God. Sin is horrible to Him, and we are sinners, and He still chooses to love us in spite of that sin, but He's also a holy and just God. He is the all-powerful God over this universe. He is the head man, if you will, over all things. Proverbs 28:14, blessed is the one who fears the Lord always, but whoever hardens his heart will fall into calamity. Now let me conclude with this. If you are not a believer today, if you are not a Christian today, then you are at conflict with God right now. You need to resolve that ultimate conflict, that sin issue that we read about throughout the Scriptures that you have between you and God. You need to resolve that. Now, the problem is there's nothing you can do to resolve it. But God, being the loving and holy and just God that He is, He sent Jesus to mend that conflict, to resolve that conflict for you. Now, what you must do is commit to Him, trust Him, embrace Him with your life by faith, and that will take care of that sinful problem that you have, that conflicting relationship you have with Him right now. But as Christians, if you're a Christian today, let me encourage you with a few things. Because conflicts are going to happen. You may have been in one this morning. You may be in one later today. You cannot avoid conflict in this life. As sinners, we are going to have problems. They are going to happen. But I believe, first, we must commit to resolving our conflicts. And what I mean is, we don't sweep it under the rug. We don't just give up and stop talking to someone. Now, maybe that might have to happen, but we don't turn to that first breath we take, but we don't berate the other person. We commit to striving to the best of our abilities to deal with the conflicts before us, to live at peace with others as God commands. Second, we must commit to the process. It may take a long time to work through some of the problems that you may have between you and someone else. And it may be very, very hard. It may be very hard and difficult to work through those things because often when there is conflict that has not been dealt with, there's many other issues that must be dealt with as well. So you must commit to the process. And then third, commit to an action plan between you and the other person. Commit to walking that path together and stick to it. I'll leave you with a passage from Hebrews 6. It says this: "So when God desired to show more convincingly to the heirs of the promise the unchangeable character of His purpose, He guaranteed it with an oath, so that by two unchangeable things, in which it is impossible for God to lie, we who have fled for refuge might have strong encouragement to hold fast to the hope set before us. We have this as a sure and steadfast anchor of the soul, a hope that enters into the inner place behind the curtain where Jesus has gone as a forerunner on our behalf, having become a high priest forever after the order of Melchizedek." Aren't you thankful that God sent Jesus to resolve our ultimate conflict, our sin problem? Now, we must get busy as Christians to resolve the conflicts that we have here on this earth as well. Let us pray. Father, thank you for the truths that we have gathered today from your scriptures. I'm so thankful this morning that this book that we hold in our hands, that we read, that we hold and often we take for granted, that there are so many truths here that we can gain and gather for this life. You did not just save us, but you gave us the instructions, the guidebook, the way to learn and live this life. And I am truly grateful today that we can know how to resolve these conflicting situations that we have every day. Please help us to seek peace. Please help us to stick to plans when we make them. And Lord, help us to be a more loving people that seeks the good of others. In your name I pray. Amen.